This is as Joe Biden told Barack Obama with the passing of the Affordable Care Act, he whispered into his ear. He didn't realize his mic was still hot, so he said on live TV, he said, "This is a big fucking deal." And this story is a big fucking deal. So Sony Pictures Entertainment has acquired the theater chain Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas. This includes its 35 locations across 25 cities. I think there's 2 in New York City, in Manhattan, and then in Brooklyn. Are there any more? I think this is the only 2. IndieWire notes that the company will still be run by CEO Michael Kusterman. He's going to report, though, to Ravi Ahaju, who's the president and COO of Sony Pictures Entertainment. It's still going to be based in Austin. It's a Texas company, that's why it's Alamo Drafthouse. And along with the acquisition, Sony's also acquiring Alamo's Fantastic Fest, which is like a genre film festival, right? So for a little bit of context about Alamo Drafthouse, so it is a dine-in movie theater chain founded in 1997. If you've never been to an Alamo Drafthouse, it's, you go to your seats, which are often very comfy, and it's, like a cushy recliner. And waiters and waitresses come to your seat and take your order for food and drinks as if it's like a restaurant, which sounds really disruptive and annoying while watching a movie, but it's actually pretty seamless. And it kind of elevates the theatrical experience beyond just like these shitty seats. I know a lot of theaters are now upgrading their seats, but like having like these shitty seats and just like you have your popcorn and snacks or whatever, and you can kind of make it almost like a date, like you're going to dinner at Alamo while watching a movie, right? And it's not just any old movie theater chain. It plays both new films as well as a healthy dosing of like classics, right? And the LA Times calls it a, quote, prime cinephile destination, end quote, with 4 million loyalty members, right? That's the big thing. I only go to Alamo Drafthouse whenever I do go. It's for like a special screening of something, like an old movie I love or a cult classic or anything like that. Which I've always said that's what movie theaters should be doing to, help their bottom line, is just have a stronger repertory curation of older films that aren't just the biggest shitty blockbuster coming out. And though Alamo Drafthouse, despite this kind of like niche that it's kind of built for itself, IndieWire notes that it's been rumored to be sold since like March. I almost did a story about it. And it really, like all movie theaters, it took a big financial hit during COVID, right? So why would Sony do this? Why would they purchase a movie? Why would they purchase Alamo Drafthouse? Why would they purchase a movie theater chain at all? So there's a few reasons, right? Number one that I saw a lot of people talking about was Crunchyroll. So if you don't know what Crunchyroll is, it is it is the largest American anime-focused streaming site. So it's a streaming service dedicated to anime. It's a huge way that American audiences are able to access a lot of anime and get it localized for American audiences. And theoretically, the people that like anime are probably also the same people that go to Alamo Drafthouse. There's this crossover of, again, people who really care about the medium of cinema. So Crunchyroll was mentioned in a bunch of places, and you can find my sources in the. If you're watching this live, you can't, but if you're watching this as like its own video, you can find the sources in the description. It was mentioned in a bunch of places as potentially getting more of these anime releases in theaters, right? IndieWire also notes, so forgetting Crunchyroll, just in general, IndieWire notes that Sony will now have the opportunity to go direct to consumer, right? Because notably, Sony does not have a streaming service. It's one of the few of the big Hollywood players that doesn't have a streaming service at this point, which turned out in retrospect to be very smart. They can just be the arms dealer in a sense and just license all their content and make all the money without having to build a streaming service from the ground up. So this would give them an opportunity to go a little more direct to consumer. And then also Sony, because of doing this, they may be able to expand Alamo's footprint. Again, because they're able to get that cash now that Alamo desperately needed, right? But, so this is a big story in and of itself. But almost in addition to the story is the historical context, which I love to go into, so I'm going to get into that now with you guys. So this is a huge development for Hollywood. So historically, film studios often owned their own movie theaters from like the beginning of the medium in like the late 19th century into the golden age of Hollywood into the 30s and 40s, right? Which you could see as maybe being a problem. So they make the movies, they distribute the movies, and they exhibit the movies. Seems maybe like a monopoly of some kind. So the Department of Justice sued the major studios in 1938 for anti-competitive and monopolistic business practices, right? This is an example of vertical integration, where essentially you control every step of the supply chain. It's hard for anyone to kind of break in at any of those steps, right? The case kind of went back and forth for like a decade. The case was finally decided in 1948 by the Supreme Court in the government's favor. This was the infamous United States v. Paramount Pictures Incorporated. It also has been colloquially, I can't say that, colloquially? Yeah. Colloquially, it sounds so funny. It's often been called the Paramount Decree, right? It kind of just like a more casual conversation. So basically, the studios were forced with a choice. They controlled production, distribution, exhibition, and the Department of Justice basically said you can have two. You can't have all three. So you have to give up one of them. And ultimately, the studios gave up exhibition. And this change had a huge effect on the American film industry. It increased the number of independent theaters. So now independent theaters had the chance to actually, have a little niche in the market against all these huge movie theaters. It increased independent film production, right? Because then they knew there was an opportunity to then go to more independent theaters. It essentially kind of, the classical studio system kind of collapsed, right? Again, it was built on this total control of the industry that they no longer had. It also led to the disintegration of the Hays Code, which was kind of like the predecessor to like the MPAA, where, films are rated G or PG. There was no ratings before. I think it was also illegal. Basically a backroom deal where all the Hollywood studios agreed to a list of kind of decency rules for their films that they would all abide by, so that, they wouldn't get regulated themselves. Like, they figured we'll regulate ourselves and we won't have the government get involved because we're having things that are too violent or too sexual or anything like that. But now that you have all those other opportunities for independent films, independent theaters, it kind of, audiences liked what they saw. They wanted more interesting stories where, this was a real thing in the Hays Code. Someone could not get away with doing a crime, right? But that limits your story and narrative potentials and thematic potentials. So, now that audiences had a taste of this, it really didn't make sense anymore for the Hays Code to exist. So this had a huge effect on the industry in ways that both were obvious and also huge downstream effects, right? And that's basically how things were for decades until Donald Trump, his Department of Justice filed to dismiss the decrees in 2019. Their argument was that, they felt that it was, quote, unlikely that the remaining defendants, they felt it was, quote, unlikely that the remaining defendants can reinstate their cartel, end quote. Their argument was that industry and audience habits had changed so much, especially with the advent of like digital distribution and streaming. It doesn't really matter if these studios own these theaters, because theaters aren't the only way that people can get, films. It's not the only way that you can watch a film now. Many people opposed this reversal. I remember reading about it when it happened. It was like late 2019 and being like, holy shit, this is huge. And we've already seen the effects of this, right? So Netflix bought the Paris Theater in New York City and the Egyptian Theater in LA. Amazon bought like an ArcLight location, I think in LA. But most of these acquisitions were for awards purposes. Again, because Netflix and Amazon, they don't traditionally have like strong distribution arms. Amazon a little more so. Like a lot of their films go to theaters, whereas Netflix their films rarely ever do. But oftentimes to qualify for certain awards, you need to like play for a week in LA or New York. Well, if you own the theater, that's a great venue just to play your film for a week, and then now you qualify, right? But so this story, coming back to this story of Sony acquiring Alamo Drafthouse, this is now the first time in, what was it, 1948? So like almost 80 years that a major film studio has directly acquired a major theater chain, right? So I think this is huge news, and this is a huge game changer. So what does this mean, right? again, this probably means a few things. One, I think the Sony Paramount potential deal is probably dead. I think this is a signal that they've moved on to more interesting things. So that's number one. The obvious question is, will more studios acquire theaters, right? Like I've said, maybe companies like Netflix and Amazon could grab some more theaters for both awards purposes, but then again to have a place to show there, because I feel like I wonder why Netflix has been so concerned about not having their films in theaters. I think it goes back to this original idea that it's we want to drive people to the subscription service. I imagine a lot of that's also, not wanting to share that money, where in Netflix it's all a closed system. So, if they own more of their own theaters, they could have, a Netflix theater, right? And it could, again, all kind of be in this closed ecosystem. Again, like I mentioned before, you're probably going to see more Alamos be opened, or at the very least, less of them being closed. I think, maybe half a dozen closed earlier this year. This will give them an extra source of cash that will be really helpful, especially as the film theatrical exhibition industry kind of tries to find its footing. But overall, it's, the lines between distribution and exhibition are becoming blurred, right? Ultimately, the difference is the distributor is the one that's advertising it, right? So, if you're seeing a commercial for a movie, AMC is not, or Regal, they're not doing that advertising. Sometimes they will, but typically those ads are being funded and put out by the distributor. That's their role, is that they work between the production company, which oftentimes they own, but if not, the production company and the exhibitor. But again, these lines are getting blurred, right? So you look at something like AMC and Taylor Swift directly distributing her concert film with AMC, right? So all of this is a fluid, changing industry, but in any case, definitely a good financial news for Alamo, again, because they have that extra source of revenue.